We never should have gone to that old abandoned school. If I had known then what I know now, I would have tried harder to convince my friends not to go. But at the time, we were just looking for a cheap thrill. Someplace creepy we could explore and say we did it. We were young and dumb, not really believing anything bad could actually happen to us. God, I wish we had listened to our instincts and stayed away. But we didn't. And now my friends are dead while I'm left haunted, knowing I'll never be the same again. It all started a few weeks ago when my buddy Jake first told us about the old Burton High School on the edge of town. It had been closed for over 50 years now, with the windows boarded up and tall chain-link fences surrounding the property to keep trespassers out. Your typical haunting ground for ghosts and other supernatural crap. As soon as Jake mentioned it, we knew we had to check it out. There were 5 of us total who showed up that night. Me, Jake, Tyler, Mike, and Will. We were all childhood friends, having grown up on the same block together. After graduating high school a year ago, we would still meet up and find ways of getting into trouble. Only this time, we took things too far. We met at Jake's house around 10 p.m., so we could drive over to Burton High together. As we loaded into Jake's old Buick, I remember feeling a knot form in my stomach. A foreboding sense that this might not be a good idea, but I chalked it up to simple nerves. There was no way I could have known the true horror which awaited us inside those decrepit walls. The moon was just a sliver in the sky by the time we arrived, providing little light as we stared up at the abandoned school. Even in the dark, we could see the 3-story building was in severe disrepair. The brick exterior crumbling, shattered windows covered in boards, rusty pipes jutting out from odd angles. Just looking at the place made my skin crawl. But Jake was already heading toward the fence, eager to get inside. The rest of us reluctantly followed. After climbing the fence, we made our way across the weed-choked yard to the side of the school. Jake shined his flashlight along the wall until he found a door with a broken lock. The door creaked open to reveal a pitch-black hallway. Jake stepped inside without hesitation, the rest of us exchanging uneasy glances before we followed him into the darkness. Our flashlights cut through the inky blackness, illuminating the debris-strewn hallway. Lockers hung open and empty, classroom doors barely clinging to their hinges. The beam from my flashlight passed over the floor, revealing it to be covered in a thick layer of dust, except for a trail of footprints. "Someone's been here recently," I said, feeling my pulse quicken. "Probably just some other kids messing around," Jake replied, though he didn't sound convinced. As we ventured deeper down the hall, the air took on a damp, moldy scent. The floorboards groaned beneath our feet, some of them sticking up at awkward angles. Everything was covered in a layer of dirt and cobwebs. The place almost seemed to be rotting from the inside out. We checked out a few of the classrooms, desks and chairs still sitting in orderly rows as if students had just gotten up and left mid-lesson. Tyler opened one of the lockers, laughing at our hysterical reaction when it slammed shut with a deafening bang. In the teacher's lounge, we found faded motivational posters hanging crooked on the walls. It was like some long-forgotten time capsule. After exploring the first floor, we found a staircase leading up to the second. Jake tried the light switch at the bottom, but wasn't surprised when nothing happened. Our flashlights continued to pierce the suffocating darkness as we ascended the steps. We were halfway up when Mike suddenly let out a startled yelp. "What?" I whispered, my chest tightening. "I just felt something brush against my leg," Mike said, aiming his flashlight at the steps below us. We all froze, waiting and watching. But there was nothing there. "Probably just a breeze," Tyler scoffed, but his voice shook slightly. We continued up the stairs cautiously, the atmosphere somehow feeling even more ominous on the second floor. The trail of footprints we had seen earlier seemed to continue down the hall to our right. We followed them, lined up close together with Jake leading the way. About halfway down the hall, Jake's flashlight illuminated a discarded book laying open on the floor. He picked it up and shined the light on its pages. It appeared to be some kind of journal, filled with handwritten entries. Jake read a few aloud, the color draining from his face. "It says this used to be the library," he told us, hands trembling. "Something awful happened here. Listen to this entry. It started with small bumps and bruises on the students, then those god-awful screams late at night. Not long after, the smell, the horrible, rotting smell. I can't bear to think what might be waiting down in the basement. But I have no choice. Tomorrow I will open that door and face what evil has infected this school. God help us all. Jake lowered the journal, looking at us with wide, frightened eyes. No one spoke as the truth of what we had gotten ourselves into sank in. This place wasn't just abandoned. Something malevolent lurked within its walls. Something evil. Mike was the first to break the silence. Guys, I want to leave. Now. Yeah, we shouldn't be here, Will muttered, trembling. I was just about to voice my agreement when a scraping sound came from up ahead. We all spun toward it, flashlights revealing a door slightly ajar at the end of the hall. The footprints trailed right to it. I bet that goes to the basement, Jake said, where whatever happened, happened. He started walking toward the door before any of us could object. Jake, what the hell are you doing? I whispered harshly. He glanced back at me, eyes glinting with morbid curiosity. Don't you want to know what's down there? No! This place is fucked up, man! Those journal entries, the footprints, the noises. We need to get the hell out of here! But Jake ignored my pleas, prying the basement door fully open. A narrow staircase disappeared down into utter darkness. The putrid stench of decay wafted up, gagging us instantly. Jake started descending before we could stop him. Come on, it'll be crazy, he said over his shoulder, already halfway down the steps. Against my better judgment, I went after him. I guess my desire not to be left alone in the dark hallway overpowered my good sense. The others eventually followed suit, cursing under their breath as we went down into the abyss. The deeper we descended, the worse the smell became, until it was a suffocating force filling my nostrils. There was a tightness in my chest, both from fear and the effort not to retch. I could hear my own heart hammering, the pulse pounding in my ears. It felt like we were descending for ages, the putrid stench growing thicker and more nauseating. Finally, we reached the basement floor. It was pitch black, our flashlights barely cutting through the dark. As the thin beams moved over our surroundings, my eyes struggled to make sense of what I was seeing. Strange symbols stained the concrete walls, drawn in what appeared to be dried blood. Animal corpses in varying states of decay littered the floor, and there were bones, so many bones, splintered, broken, scattered in heaps. In the far corner, there was a doorway covered by a heavy cloth. The footprints we had followed downstairs led straight to it. I stood paralyzed, not wanting to see what lurked behind that curtain, but knowing we had already come too far. Jake stepped forward and ripped the cloth down. As it fell away, the smell hit us like a tidal wave. It was the foulest thing I had ever smelled, rot and decay and sickness. Will doubled over and puked, but somehow, Jake kept moving forward. I don't know how any of us could stand it, but we were all drawn toward that doorway like moths to a flame, compelled by some sadistic curiosity. In the beam of Jake's flashlight, the room appeared empty at first, but then I saw it, my mind refusing to accept what my eyes were seeing. In the center of the room was some kind of altar, and atop it, a decomposing body so rotten and mutilated it was impossible to identify as the man or woman they once were. This could not be real. It had to be a nightmare. But the putrid scent filling my lungs and the terrified screams of my friends echoed all around me reminded me this was very real. Before any of us could react, shadows suddenly darted across the walls, too quick for our flashlight beams to follow. Then I felt it, an icy cold hand grasping my ankle tightly. I cried out and tried to wrench myself free, but the bony fingers only dug in deeper. That's when the whispering started. Horrifying mutterings in some strange guttural language I couldn't identify. The room seemed to sway and blur around me. I blinked hard, trying to clear my vision. When I opened my eyes again, that's when I saw them. They were people, or at least had been once. Pale skeletal figures wrapped in tattered clothing, their flesh rotted away to reveal the bone beneath. Empty black holes where their eyes should have been. They were emerging from the shadows, clawing their way toward us. My friends screamed, the beam of Jake's flashlight catching more of the nightmarish creatures coming forth. I kicked violently, finally breaking free from the icy grasp on my leg. Adrenaline coursed through me as I spun and sprinted for the stairs. I expected to hear my friends' footsteps close behind, but as I ran, I realized I was alone. Their terrified screams echoed from the basement, slicing through my heart like knives. I wanted to go back, tried to force my legs to turn around, but it was like my body had a mind of its own. Self-preservation kept me climbing those stairs on trembling legs, tears streaming down my face. I didn't stop running until I was outside, doubling over and gasping for breath beneath the cold light of the moon. Only then did I dare to glance back at the school looming behind me. It was utterly silent and still, giving no indication of the horrors I had witnessed within. I stood there struggling to make sense of it all, praying desperately for my friends to come bursting through those doors safe and sound. It couldn't end like this. It just couldn't. But as the minutes ticked by without any sign of them, reality sank in. They were gone. I was the only one to make it out alive. I wanted to go back for them, send help, do something, but I had no proof of what I had seen. No one would believe me. They would think I was crazy or on drugs, making up some wild story to cover the fact that I'd abandoned my friends. All I could do was go to the police, tell them we had come here as a dumb teenage thrill-seek, and now my friends were missing. The police searched every inch of that decaying school, but found no trace of the horrors I witnessed. No blood symbols, animal corpses, bones, altar, rotting body, or skeletal creatures. Just an abandoned building with no evidence of anyone having been there in decades. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. Had it all been some kind of delusion or waking nightmare? In the weeks that followed, I was questioned relentlessly about what happened that night, but I had no answers for them. No logical explanation. My friend's fate remained a mystery. As the police eventually ruled it a cold case, I was left haunted with the knowledge that I would never truly know what happened to them. That school took them from me, and the not knowing is a torture I'll have to live with forever. Somehow life moved forward in a hazy blur. I graduated, went off to college, tried to leave it all behind me. But the nightmares never ceased. I remained the only one to walk out of that school alive, and the survivor's guilt is something I'll carry till the day I die. We shouldn't have gone there. We should have listened to our instincts and stayed away. But we didn't. And now I have to live with the consequences. I eventually finished college and moved far away to start a new life, hoping distance would finally give me peace. And for a while, it did. I found a good job, made new friends, and stopped having the nightmares. For the first time in years, it seemed like I might finally move past what happened that night. But the reprieve was short-lived. About 5 years after the incident, I received a strange letter in the mail. It had no return address, and was simply addressed to the survivor. Unease trickled down my spine as I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a single piece of paper with an address scribbled in hurried handwriting along with the words, "Go there tonight if you want answers." I stared at the paper, my pulse racing. This had to be some kind of cruel prank. But what if it wasn't? What if this was my chance to find out what really happened to my friends that night? The not knowing had haunted me all these years. Didn't I owe it to them to seek the truth if I had the chance? Every ounce of reason told me to throw that piece of paper away and not look back. But in the end, my all-consuming need for answers won out. As night fell, I drove to the mysterious address with dread pooling in my gut. It led me to an old house on the edge of town. Or at least, what remained of a house. It had clearly been ravaged by fire years ago, blackened timbers jutting towards the sky. Dark gaps where windows had once been now resembled empty eye sockets staring out in anguish. Walking through the front door felt like stepping into a tomb. The scorched floorboards creaked under my weight as I navigated through the charred remains with a flashlight gripped tightly in hand. Each room was almost unrecognizable. Any trace of what this place had been burned away. Except for one. At the end of a hallway, a doorway stood oddly untouched. The door still hung on its hinges, completely unburned. Foreboding clawed up my throat, but I had to see what lay beyond it. Taking a deep breath, I turned the knob and stepped inside. The flashlight fell from my limp grasp, clattering to the floor. No, it couldn't be. But there was no denying what I was seeing. On every surface were photos, newspaper clippings, and strange symbols, all related to the Burton High abandonment and my friend's disappearance. This was the lair of some obsessed and sadistic mind. I spun to flee but froze at the sound of a dark chuckle. From the shadows stepped a tall, rail-thin man with sunken eyes and sallow skin. Something about him turned my blood to ice, a primal recognition of evil. He studied me with a hungry, unsettling smile. I've waited a long time for this reunion. The survivor and the savior together at last. His voice was like shards of glass dragged over stone. I tried to respond, but could only manage a strangled gasp. The man tilted his head, regarding me with morbid fascination. "Do you still dream of them?" he asked softly. "Your friends screaming in the dark, crying out for you to save them?" Rage roared through me, momentarily blotting out my fear. "What the hell do you know about that?" The thin man clucked his tongue. "Oh, I know many things. I know what really happened that night, and I know it will happen again." His hand snaked out faster than I could react, latching onto my wrist with an icy grip. His mouth twisted into a skeleton's grin, eyes burning with madness. "This time you won't escape. We have so very much to discuss, you and I. After all, the night is still young." His chilling laughter echoed through the room as my screams joined the ghostly refrain still ringing through these damned halls. In the end, there was no escaping fate's grasp. The dead still called out from the dark, beckoning me back to join them at last. Back to that damn school where my innocence died along with my friends. Back to the horrors that have haunted me all these years. Back to a nightmare without end.